Okay, so our first keynote speaker, I've been really looking forward to this one, Retwana Khan. I know that she's really, really passionate about what she's doing, and it really shines through when she talks. So please give her a really, really big applause.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you to everybody for coming. I know some of you had to drag yourself out of beds after the networking event last night and brave the cold this morning as well. So thank you for coming to see me speak. Thank you to Pycon for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. The past 3 days have been absolutely amazing with some phenomenal speakers. It's my first time in Serbia, and it's been absolutely great. My favorite part being the people. Everybody's really friendly and nice here. So, my favorite part of being a software developer is that I'm able to build systems that make an impact to people's lives. I'm able to usually create something out of nothing, and I have the power to start off with a blank slate and then just build it up to something amazing. It's a great feeling knowing that almost anything is possible. So instead of spending a lot of time introducing myself and saying what I do, instead I'm going to let the power of LinkedIn and Twitter do its work. And what I prefer to do for my introduction is actually, being the designated South African here today, is to give you a little bit of insight into my home country. Okay. So most people expect South Africa to look like this, a jungle. But it actually looks like this. So, and like this. The first picture is the city that I was born in, Johannesburg. It's the largest city in South Africa. We call it the City of Gold because it's of its origins as a gold mining town. It's a fast-paced and really buzzing city, just the way I like it. The second picture is the city that I love to take week-long vacations in, Cape Town. It's the mother city. It's absolutely breathtaking and leaves its visitors and inhabitants in awe. However, the most special part of South Africa that truly makes it unique is its diversity. We often refer to as the Rainbow Nation because of this diversity. The population of South Africa is around 56 million people, and we have 11 official languages. In any part of the city that I live or I work in, I'm able to interact with a broad spectrum of people across different races and religions. Our rich history, filled with struggle for democracy, freedom, and equality, makes me value this diversity to an even greater extent. When you visit South Africa, you'll notice a lot of our strange, but very well-loved behaviors. Here's some for your entertainment. In South Africa, so most people call this a barbecue. In South Africa, we call it a braai. This over here in the second picture, you'd refer to it as a traffic light. We refer to it as a robot. No, it doesn't speak or it doesn't move. We just call it a robot. And lastly, our most common oxymoron that is used in our everyday conversation. If someone asks you, "How are you?" I tend to say, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." It's a bit strange for many English speakers elsewhere. The no in the response constitutes a surprising element, initially leading to concern on whether everything is well. But we're actually saying, yes, we're good. It's just we're weird like that. All in all, I love South Africa for its beauty, its diversity, its friendliness, and its growing development. So I could spend this entire keynote romanticizing you about my country, but I'll let you buy a ticket and come see South Africa for yourself. It's time to move on to the topic that I'll be speaking about, expanding your toolkit for self-development. So self-development for me, and I think most developers, is a constant battle. One of my biggest fears is going through life simply living from year to year without having any awareness of my goals, whether they be professional or personal. I started off my career in corporate, whereby I worked within a pretty big team of around 13 developers, building internal telecommunication products for these teams. I then moved on to co-found a bespoke software development company. Over the span of 3 years, I had consulted to at least 7 different clients. And during this time, I'd integrated with multiple teams, or I'd just simply built products for the clients. At the same time, I worked on building my own development team within my company. A couple of months ago, I transitioned out of my company. I did a bit of solo consulting, and now I work with a company in the US that does computer vision and machine learning for true identity systems. To sum it all up, what a wayward but truly exciting journey. It has been this journey that has equipped me to find patterns based on my experiences and to build up a set of guidelines that keep me focused and progressing in my growth and my goals. I'm sure that some of you here have shared my experiences, or maybe some of you will share them in the future. But through this talk, I hope to simply provide a different perspective on what I believe to have been a valuable toolset within this journey of mine. When I use the term toolset, I'm not necessarily talking about the technical tools that we use in the coding process on a daily basis, but rather the tools that make me a more knowledgeable and a more effective developer. The tools that I use on a daily basis speak directly to the challenges that I've encountered during my journey. But before talking about them, I think I'd like to first ask you guys a couple of questions and gather your feedback, and I think wake everybody up a little bit. Okay, so please raise your hand for the following. The first question: who has ever solved a problem midway and then realized that you may possibly be solving the wrong problem? Just as I expected. So I'd like to introduce you to my problem-solving toolkit. I'll shed some light on how I break up these complex problems into smaller, more manageable problems, and then also how we try to understand the problems as best as possible. Second question: who has looked at their Twitter feed or their social media feed and just scrolled through it and felt so overwhelmed because there's so many different people doing so many great things out there. There's so many new technologies, buzzwords, and frameworks. Who's ever felt that? I have too. I often wonder, how do people get a chance to do so much? Do they have the same 24 hours as me? But instead of getting demotivated, I focused on sort of figuring out how best to learn and how to track my small and my big accomplishments and strive towards new ones. But coding all day, meeting deadlines, and also learning new tech really takes its toll. I'm not superhuman. Hence, I've learned how to prioritize and how to be able to execute, and I've learned that they're really important tools in order to ensure that I don't procrastinate or burn out. And finally, my last question. I'm curious to know how many of you work in teams versus freelancing. So hands up for those that work in teams. Okay, so a lot of you actually work in teams. I've done both in the past couple of years. I've done some freelancing and solo consulting, and I've worked within teams. I've worked within small teams, big teams, medium-sized teams. And this is when I realized that the most common challenge across all these different sized teams is communication. The synergy of a team is really dependent on the effectiveness of communication. Not only is communication vital for the team that you're working with, but it's also useful in order to be able to interact with your stakeholders, your fellow designers, and just people in general. So problem solving, learning to learn, prioritizing, executing, and communicating effectively have been really tough lessons to learn over the past couple of years, but it has been so vital for my development and my growth. I'll dive into each one of them, but let's start off with problem solving. So the first thing I do is I grab a cup of coffee to keep me going, to keep energized, and to feed my addiction when I have to solve a new problem. I then start exploring the problem-solving space. I sincerely believe that one will not be able to solve a problem without actually understanding the problem. That sounds so basic, but we've seen earlier by a show of hands that so many of us start delving into the solution without actually understanding the problem. The way that I try to understand my problem is to ask as many questions as I possibly can. Once you have the answers to these questions, what I like to do is I tend to reiterate that. What I try to do is to reiterate the problem back to the person that actually had explained the problem to me. And then finally, I try to gather as much insight and context around the domain and around sort of the lessons that other people have learned from solving a problem that's similar. Now that I understand what the problem is, the next step is to break down my problems. Big problems are nothing more than a collection of little problems. The faster that you can break down these big problems, the faster that you can make them into smaller solvable components, the faster that you can generate ideas that will solve your biggest issues. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and only 5 minutes solving it. The time that you invest in dimensionalizing about a problem-solving space will help you. It's going to help you to solve the problem faster, quicker, and more effectively. Next, I plan a solution. Planning a solution is the stage whereby you're moving from the problem identification stage to the problem solution stage. I tend to create a plan with actionable steps. Hence, I use sentences like I need to. I need to makes it really useful, and I emphasize actionable. Thereafter, I go ahead and I start implementing my solution. I don't just start writing code. I first write a bit of pseudocode. Pseudocode, as you know, serves as a template or an outline for the process of actually writing the computer code. And it's extremely, extremely effective in helping to ensure that the essential details are included. A huge benefit is that it catches your potential mistakes from the get-go, and it's far cheaper to fix these mistakes whilst you're still writing the pseudocode than in the actual development process. I tend to write my pseudocode as comments within the code so that I can actually swap it out with actual code at a later stage. And finally, I implement my code in the actual programming language of choice. After it's all over, I bask in the glory that I think that I've solved one of the world's greatest problems, and I reflect upon my solution. It is during this time that I'm able to optimize, tweak, and contextualize. This is by far my most favorite, yet my most neglected part of the process. As time passes in this constantly evolving industry, eventually everyone finds their own methods on how to learn. What works for one person might not necessarily work for the next person. A large majority of developers use video material in order to obtain and process knowledge about a subject. I personally struggle to remain focused when watching longer length videos, and so I prefer using sites like Egghead that have smaller, more focused 5-minute videos that break down the subject matter and really hold my attention. Code School and Pluralsight have also been useful over the years because it encourages first watching a video that's focused on a particular topic and then actually going in and implementing it. Research articles are also a great way to learn, to expand your knowledge, and to explore the depth of a topic. They can be intimidating when you start off reading them, but as soon as you go through a couple, it becomes easier to find a method to translate them for your practical understanding. They're really valuable because they provide focused and a thorough and deep understanding of the subject. I cannot place enough emphasis on how beneficial and effective it is to read the source docs instead of randomly Googling an issue when you encounter it. Our default mode when we encounter an issue is to just go to Google, enter something into the search bar, and get an answer. However, sometimes the more cleanable, scalable, and the more up-to-date solution is actually in the docs. I know that it can be quicker to just Google a solution. I'm guilty of it multiple times. However, when you start seeing yourself going in circles and actually ending up on the same Stack Overflow issue multiple times, I've been there, I've been 10 times. It says they last visited 2 minutes ago. When you see yourself doing that, it may be time to actually read the docs and see if there is a solution there. When I read, I like to keep in mind that I'm not only learning this particular topic, but I'm trying to expand my knowledge in the area of software development, making it easier to learn the next topic. Learning by audio or podcast is also a fantastic way for me to learn and spend those endless hours in traffic. Listening to debates, discussions, reviews, tips and tricks have helped me keep my sanity when the person in front of me just decides to cut into my lane. I'm all about killing two birds with one stone. Finally, strangely enough, I tend to use Twitter as a source of knowledge. As overwhelming as Twitter can sometimes get, there are amazing people on Twitter doing some amazing things. There are so many people that have imparted useful knowledge, advice, and trends on Twitter that have helped my professional career. When I joined the industry, I knew that it would be constantly evolving, and I would be constantly learning, and that's the reason that I actually enjoy being a part of this industry. However, that doesn't mean that I don't feel overwhelmed or overloaded at times. Of course I do. But the way I counter that is I try to introduce diversity in my learnings and in my interests. When I traveled to the US a year ago, the aspect that struck me the most about the developers that I worked with at LinkedIn was the way that they had diversity in their interests. A combination of art and computer science is explosive because combining analytical thinking with creative thinking induces innovation, creativity, and uniqueness. So instead of listening, reading, and watching only videos that are related to technical topics, I try and mix it up a little bit, because inspiration comes from the smallest of things, and being exposed to a variety of areas opens my mind and broadens up my horizons. Once I learn something new, I find ways to absorb that knowledge. This is usually through doing, and more doing. Implementation is vital for learning. Theory without practice is just information at the end of the day. I like to either create smaller personal projects or use the information that I've learned in an existing project. Another great way to absorb information is to teach. Teaching through blog posts or speaking are the most common. When I speak about a topic, it can be as casual as I'd like it to be. So perhaps I'm getting a cup of coffee in the kitchen and I talk to a fellow colleague about what I've just learned. It can be talking at a local meetup or at a conference. Teaching a subject really forces its evaluation from a different perspective and can provide a deeper understanding of the particular topic that you're learning. Lastly, I'd like to mention that learning does not have to be structured in a way whereby you feel overwhelmed with information and overloaded. I know that I've listed out so many methods on how to learn and then to solidify your knowledge, but everyone has their good days, and sometimes we're not able to process and power through content the way that we'd like to, whereas other times we also just feel overworked and exhausted. It's during this time that I like to remind myself that I don't need to always feel pressured. Sometimes I just need to breathe, and that's okay. When these days arise, I like to have something available to be able to look back on my accomplishments. The way that I'm able to do this is I keep a list of what I've learned every day, no matter how small they are. I tend to keep a journal on either Evernote, Trello, Excel, whatever you feel is best for you. And it enlists what I've learned each day and what my goals are. When you write down your future and your past goals, you're able to keep track of how you're spending your time. And hence, you're making sure that you're actually going in the direction that you'd like to be going instead of wandering aimlessly. That being said, in order to direct our goals and meet our daily commitments, we need to be able to prioritize our time accordingly. There are constant demands on our time and attention, and it can be often difficult to identify exactly what our priorities should be when there's just so much to be done. I'm a scatterbrain, and I tend to always feel pressured and overwhelmed unless I prioritize each day. I tend to write down my professional and my personal goals for the week, It's basically just a brain dump of tasks that I need to get done, irrespective of how important or how negligible those tasks are. I write it down on paper just to get it all out of my mind and onto something else. The next step that I use in order to prioritize my task is Eisenhower's urgent, important principle. I'm going to go through the basics of the principle, but you can basically read up on it online. To use this principle, let's understand what is important versus what is urgent. Important activities have an outcome that lead us to achieving our goals, whether these are professional or personal. Urgent activities need to be done immediately, and they demand immediate attention. They are usually associated with achieving someone else's goal. The consequences of not dealing with urgent actions is usually negative. Eisenhower's urgent and important principle says that you can categorize the task into 4 quadrants. So, quadrant 1 is for urgent and important tasks, things that you have to focus on first and that have to be done the same day. Quadrant 1 tasks usually entail things like a crisis or an angry client, a production environment that just went down, a family member that's ill, or basically any deadlines that, if not met right now, will have serious negative consequences. You don't want to keep putting out fires. Oops, I don't know what happened there. You don't want to keep putting out fires. Hence, you always want to keep important and urgent tasks to a minimum and not let a task get into this quadrant, especially through procrastination. Quadrant 2 is for long-term strategizing and development. These are tasks that you should add to your schedule. Quadrant 2 tasks are usually centered around strengthening relationships, planning for the future, learning, improving yourself, and networking. This is where we should seek to spend most of our time, as they're the ones that provide us with lasting happiness, fulfillment, and success. Quadrant 3 is for time-pressured distractions. They are not really important, and they usually mean that someone wants these things now. So things like paying bills, data entry work, maybe booking tickets for travel, coffee requests, and running errands. These are usually what you should try and delegate to other people. Quadrant 4 is for those activities that yield little or no value. These are neither urgent nor important, and things like co-worker gossip, changing a profile picture, and basically anything that's going to yield little value. Quadrant 4 tasks may not actually make it to your list, and that's okay. In fact, that's probably what you want. Keep in mind that each person's situation is unique, so what may be important to you may not necessarily be important to the next person. Once I've broken down my tasks per quadrant, I then estimate how long each task will take and set out what tasks will be tackled per day. This usually takes around 15 minutes of my day, but the value that it yields is absolutely priceless. Finally, uncertainty and change are given. So we need to be prepared to accept that our priorities may change and that we may need to be constantly reassessing situations and be responding appropriately. Using methods like Eisenhower's principle or even your own prioritization system is extremely valuable, and it will help you identify your goals, but by no means will it suddenly give you the power to execute. That is up to you. Execution is a critical aspect of self-development. Taking a task over a finish line is one of the more valuable skills that someone can own. Starting is important, yet probably the most difficult. Sometimes, when we solve complex problems, we tend to make them bigger in our heads. We tend to fear them, and then we do what we know best, that is, to procrastinate. In order to overcome procrastination, we need to understand procrastination. In order to understand procrastination, I really like to think in terms of my future self and my present self. My future self is responsible for setting goals. My present self can take action and can execute. When it's time to make decisions, I'm no longer thinking about my future self. but I'm actually thinking in the present moment about my present self. However, researchers have discovered that the present self actually likes instant gratification and not long-term payoff. So the present self and the future self are just always at odds with one another. For example, one of the most relatable procrastination problems that I have pretty often is whereby the future self and present self are at constant conflicts with one another. So, for example, if I have a deadline to meet, 2 weeks earlier, future self commits that he or she will be able to deliver to a client in 2 weeks. Future self thinks, great, I have 2 entire weeks to do this feature. I can do some really cool things. I can get the architecture correct, I can polish it, I can make things sparkle and spin, I can do the works. A day later, present self says, I don't think we should start today. I think let's just put this off a little bit. We still have enough time. A week before the deadline, present self thinks to him or herself, I've been so busy, I really should get started on this feature. There's some nagging anxiety and a bit of pain. But present self says, I need to relax too. It can really wait. I haven't watched this Big Bang Theory episode in such a long time. Finally, a day or 2 before the deadline, present self now realizes that future consequences have actually turned into present consequences. Present self now starts typing furiously and writing code furiously, pulling even an all-nighter. The pain of procrastination has finally escalated, and present self has crossed the action line. The pain begins to subside. What am I talking about, you may ask? Here's a chart. Point A on the chart, being in the middle of procrastination, is often more painful than point B on the chart, which is being in the middle of work. The guilt, shame, and anxiety often feels worse than the effort and energy that you put in whilst you're working. The problem is not doing the work, it's actually starting the work. In order to be able to stop procrastinating, or maybe just minimize procrastinating, we need to make it as easy as possible for the present self to just get started and to trust that the motivation and the momentum will come after we begin. If only present self was able to get started quicker and get to the action line quicker, it would alleviate so much of the pressure and overwhelming feelings. And that's where a toolset becomes handy, my execution toolset. The most intuitive thing to help you get over your mindset, like I mentioned, is to just start. It doesn't sound like very useful advice, right? Like, if you tell me I'm having a problem doing something and I tell you just start, you're probably going to want to kill me. But seriously, when I had this keynote to write and I was running slightly late, I just started. I typed anything that came to mind, whether it made sense or not, whether it was grammatically correct or not, I just put it down onto paper. When I have complex code to write and I'm finding it difficult to start, I just start writing with the simplest of things, maybe the HTML or the CSS, things that I know, things that are simple, things that will get me into the code. This leads me to my next point. When you're struggling to execute, breaking down the tasks into smaller executable components break the task down into smaller and executable components that seem achievable. And once you know what these small tasks are, try using something like the Pomodoro technique in order to be able to execute. The Pomodoro technique encourages that you set focus time intervals of 25 minutes to focus on your task at hand and then take a 5-minute break. This helps you to not only break your tasks into smaller tasks that keep you aware of, but it also helps you to keep yourself aware of how much time you're actually spending on the task. Excellence is a great app timer for the Pomodoro technique. Another useful tip is to limit the distractions around you. Things like ensuring that your mail and your phone isn't buzzing all the time and that your Facebook isn't open, enticing you to see what everyone else is up. What everyone else around you is up to. It will help you to get into a deeper focus quicker and also to be able to stay there for longer periods. I like using things like Stay Focused for times when my willpower just fails me completely. Talking about deep focus, there's a psychological state that we get into called flow. I personally like to call it in the zone. I'm sure that you've all experienced it at some time or the other. You know, that feeling where you're so engrossed in whatever activity you're sort of executing, and that you've completely lost track of time. Everything but the task at hand is forgotten. Time, surroundings, and even yourself, your mind and body seem to just produce things effortlessly. Gosh, I love that feeling. And over the years, I've tried to optimize my environment and life for more flow experiences. As a programmer, I found that one of the biggest enhancements to flow is a fast feedback loop. If my write run build cycle is almost immediate, I'm able to make adjustments and to maintain my focus for longer periods of time. A fast feedback loop leads to flow, which means as developers, we should try things like automated tests, which help us to have a view of our entire environment whilst giving us an instant thumbs up or thumbs down. Automated testing removes dependencies like slow network connections. The second element is to automate as much as you can so that you do not have to go through too many manual steps in order to make a change. As an example, when you're constructing an API and a front end, it can be really frustrating to have to start up the API and start up the front end each time. This disrupts one's state of flow. Try to add a proxy script that will help to do this for you automatically. According to an article from The Simple Programmer, flow states arise most naturally from the sweet spot between skill and challenge. Too little of either, and we end up apathetic. Too much challenge with too little skill means we have anxiety. Too little challenge can lead to boredom. Getting this balance right to optimize for flow can be really tricky, especially when you're not in control of what tasks you're actually executing. So this is where we try to use flow to our benefit. We can start off with tasks that get you into their flow state, simple, manageable ones that you're able to make progress on. Once you complete those and you're at your peak level of concentration, pick up tasks that cause you the anxiety so that you can benefit from your flow state by using it on tasks that will benefit from you being focused and having an unyielding concentration. Finally, once you've completed execution, remember to reward yourself and celebrate your achievements, irrespective of their size. For me, my rewards are usually a little happy dance or maybe some ice cream. Yours could be, gosh, practically anything. Now that I've talked at length about how I tend to manage my workflow through techniques for problem solving, being able to learn effectively, managing my priorities for sustainability and effectiveness and executing, what about the more human aspect of things? The dreaded words that a lot of developers fear, myself included at one point, communication. Let's be honest. The general stereotype about developers is that we're really difficult beings and that we don't like communicating with others. We would prefer to have headphones and just continue coding our days away. But how does this actually affect team dynamics? I like to think of a team as a car, as the engine of a car. Even if each of the parts of the engine are well oiled and taken care of, without the other engine components, without the individual parts, the car just won't work well together. The car will break down and it might not even start. A team is no different. Each member will be working on the individual features of a system, but only when combined can it create a completed picture. By implementing an ongoing communication strategy throughout, projects will come together seamlessly at the end. Not only will good communication benefit the project, but it also helps people to feel motivated, valued, and to promote better team synergy. In order for a team to be effective, productive, and growing, communication is so vital. Let's talk about this in terms of our real-world projects and where the gaps usually lie. So when I work in big teams, the simplest potential workflow involves at least 4 other people. This is a back-end developer that can work on the API, a front-end developer, a designer, and a project manager. For the most part, their duties are pretty separate. But in order to develop a seamless feature system that is able to meet expectations and in order to be able to scale, we need each person in the team to be able to collaborate and communicate effectively. Usually, when we assign a back-end and a front-end developer to a project, it's so that they can build out the back-end and the front-end in parallel. This speeds up the overall development time and ensures a knowledge spread. However, in order to do this, collaboration and communication is key. Some of the things that I've done in the past in order to aid this collaboration and communication is upfront planning sessions. This is whereby we determine the overall behavior of the system, how the API endpoints will look, and how the data structure looks. During these sessions, we create documents that focuses on the piece of the puzzle that basically communicates with the backend and the front end, the API. It outlines the necessary endpoints and the data structure for each of these endpoints. This allows the front end to be built concurrently with the API using mock data, thus speeding up the time whilst ensuring that collating the front end and back end will raise minimal issues. In addition, it is a good practice to deploy early and integrate after every endpoint rather than at the end. This may actually slow down development time, but overall it will increase the delivery time and ensure accuracy. Collaboration between developers and designers are one of the more well-known issues. Developers are constantly complaining that designers have unrealistic expectations of developers are constantly complaining that designers have unrealistic expectations of things like their capabilities, browsers, HTML, CSS, and designers are always complaining that we're difficult people. If we had to collaborate with designers in an effective manner, working with them to determine the feasibility of certain designs within the context of development environment, this will reduce the amount of back and forth in design as well as increase the ability to accurately meet clients' expectations. Good communication between developers and designers allow projects to run on time and in a cost-effective manner. Because once again, changing the way that a feature behaves during the design phase is often more cheaper and cost-effective than during the development phase. Once again, I think being able to communicate on the tools that are appropriate, so for instance, on actual mockups, is probably key. As you hear from the scenario above, even though there are 4 individuals involved, a lot of communication was required in order to be able to take this project to the finish line. When I talk about communication, it does not mean physically getting up from your desk and going to hover over someone else's desk and asking them a question or giving them instructions. What it does mean is using the correct method or tool to articulate yourself in a way that allows your peers to easily comprehend and reference the exchange. Quantity in communication, just like clothing, is overrated and less important. It's the quality which translates to the effectiveness of the communication. Effective communication to me means ensuring that you're including not all, but rather the relevant people in the relevant discussions. It means relating goals and expectations and delays for every action beforehand and as they come up. It's listening to others with an open mind and respect for their opinion. It's giving constructive feedback in a mindful manner when appropriate. And finally, it is about using the correct channels based on the nature of the conversation. Talking about effective communication, I'd like to do a quick survey. By a show of hands, who uses Slack nowadays for your communication, team communication? Okay. So I think a lot of people have moved to Slack for team communication. And I'd like to translate effective communication into a Slack workflow and what works and what doesn't. Slack is great when used appropriately with the correct etiquette. It's a useful leveling ground for introverts and extroverts making it easier to feel heard without getting out of your comfort zone. Decisions can be made quicker whilst keeping everyone informed and on the same page. So you see, Slack can be great provided that you keep conversations scoped to the appropriate channels and on topic, so that discussions and ideas don't get lost in the shuffle of everyday talk and in a single big channel. Slack can be great provided that you don't act on brain farts and send someone a DM each time you think of something great. Slack can be great if you don't instant message someone expecting an immediate response, even though it's not as important. When you start a DM with a colleague, make sure that the DM is the appropriate tool to use. Because when a person is disrupted from their task at hand, it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to just get back into their tasks. I don't know how many of you experience this, but my worst nightmare is when I've just had a Slack conversation with someone and they take in 10 minutes to reply, and I'm looking at my screen and it says, Johnny's typing for like 10 minutes. I can't concentrate on anything else. So be mindful and be respectful about people, time, and about your expectations. Also, don't be afraid to use email if it will allow you to get your point across in a more structured and a more coherent way. It will also give the receiver some opportunity to ponder over the content in order to be able to respond in a thoughtful and in an insightful manner. In conclusion, I'd like to say that problem solving, being able to learn, prioritize, execute, and communicate have been my biggest assets over the past couple of years, thus allowing me to lead a life that feels more productive, fulfilling, and meaningful. I mean, if I'm going to be doing this software development thing for the next 25 years, I want to be able to be doing it to the best of my capabilities and to be as effective as I possibly can. My name is Ridwana Khan, and thank you so much for listening. Do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Want to answer, read out loud an answer?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so can you give me a breakdown of the time you spend in a week doing code, dev learning, and non-coding personal activities? So what I usually do is especially in recent times, I've been trying to keep my weekends for more non-coding personal activities, at least one day of the weekend for non-coding activities. Usually during my day, I spend my 8 hours working with whatever company work I have. But within that time, I make sure that I've allocated out a time for learning. So it has to usually be something that will integrate into my project. In terms of my dev learning, I tend to do them either on a Friday or a Saturday, so one day of the weekend, something just that I enjoy doing or learning. And also every day, like I keep like an hour out and I say, this is what I'm going to learn today, and this is how I'm going to implement it, and I spend time doing that. So it's 1 hour a week for dev learning, non-coding activities, usually on a Sunday I try and keep open. And then my week goes in code. How do you balance between Pomodoro's 25-minute windows of activity and getting into and preserving mental flow? So I think the main thing about the Pomodoro technique is the default is 25 minutes. When I know that I'm getting into a more complex task or something that's going to require me to concentrate for a longer period of time, I increase the window. With the app that I use, it's possible to do that. And if I feel like at the 25-minute mark, I'm actually going to be interrupted and I'm going to be in my state of flow, and now the Pomodoro technique is going to interrupt that state of flow, then I usually just increase the window. I think I don't keep to the standard 25 minutes. I think depending on the nature of the task, that's how I sort of choose my window for my Pomodoro technique. Given there are studies proving people can't be in a state of flow for longer than 3 to 4 hours in a day, do you think that an 8-hour workday should not be applied to developers and knowledge workers in general? I think nobody completes an 8-hour workday. I think the biggest change for me when moving from a corporate to a remote job was that I realized that nobody actually executes out an 8-hour-a-day coding. So usually if you're in an office, you spend like an hour on a break, you spend time on making coffee, you spend time on chatting to other people. It's only when you work remotely and you're actually using toggle time, you realize that even just 5 hours of full coding is exhausting. Like a 5-hour coding period is just insane. So I think, what is the question? Did you read? Sorry, so I think it was that is an 8-hour a day feasible for work? I don't think 8 hours a day is feasible for work. I do 8 to 10 hours when it's like in crunch mode and I'm like under a lot of pressure. I think a normal work day of actual coding is usually around 4 to 5 hours, and there've been studies that have actually proved this that you can read up on. Okay. For important and maybe not so urgent tasks, isn't procrastination actually helpful in increasing the optionality? Example, if you need for the task gets cancelled midway, less time is wasted, the execution happens with more available information. For important and not so urgent tasks, isn't. So I think that procrastination is never really helpful. I think procrastination means sort of building up into a state whereby you're not actually doing anything useful. So if a task gets cancelled midway, less time is wasted. Firstly, I think that usually when you're starting tasks, you should always try and get as much information about them as possible. So if you're seeing that too many tasks are getting cancelled midway, especially in important but not urgent tasks, which are basically the tasks where you want to set goals for yourself and strategize. You don't want your tasks to be getting cancelled midway for important and urgent tasks. So I think you don't want to be procrastinating, firstly, and you don't want the tasks to get cancelled midway, because these are tasks that you've sort of scheduled ahead of time that are trying to improve your long-term fulfillment and success. Do you use the must-have, should-have, could-have method? I think all these methods, I've heard of the must-have, should-have, and could-have methods. I think they very, very closely relate to like the Eisenhower's principle. You can sort of find correlations between them, and you can use it. I don't personally use it, but I think it's effective nevertheless. I think just some sort of prioritization is important. What about a one-man team? Where and with him should he or she talk? Sorry, I don't actually understand the question.
Anyone want to elaborate? If you're a one-person team, who do you talk to?
Okay. I've been a one-person team sometime. Who do you talk to? I tend to go to meetups if I'm a one-person team. I find that I get really useful, insightful conversations from meetups. I tend to attend conferences. I tend to join Slack channels that have a dev community and a dev presence. That's where I sort of get my food for thought and my communication and just my ability to be able to grow from those sort of interactions. And that's it.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I just finished my keynote at Pycon Balkan, and these past few days have been absolutely amazing. I've watched so many phenomenal talks over the past 3 days,